Okay, so you know how sometimes you get a news story and it's like, wow, this is big, but then it's also like a key that unlocks all these other questions?
Yeah.
Like this is just the tip of the iceberg and it gets you thinking about so many other things.
Right.
I think that's exactly what happened on March 19th, 2025, when we all heard about this pretty stunning arrest in Turkey.
Yeah,
A
absolutely.
really big political figure, Ekrem İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul.
Right. And for anyone listening who maybe isn't super familiar with Turkish politics, you have to understand, like, Gavamolu, he's not just some local mayor.
Right, he's a pretty big deal.
Exactly. Istanbul. It's Turkey's biggest city. It's the cultural hub,
Yeah,
the economic heart. And being mayor there, it carries a ton of weight.
definitely.
And İmamoğlu, he's from the main opposition party, the CHP, the Republican People's Party.
Right.
And get this, he's actually defeated the ruling AK party twice now in mayoral elections.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the most recent win was in 2024, and he won by a landslide. So that right there puts him in a really strong position, you know, as a potential future presidential candidate.
Yeah, I mean, those weren't even close races. Like, he really dominated Istanbul. And, you know, for a city as important as Istanbul, like you said, it's kind of a big deal.
Huge.
So then, when the news hit on March 19th that he'd been arrested, it was a shock. And the reasons they gave were really serious stuff.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking corruption, bribery,
Yeah.
and then to top it all off, supporting terrorism, specifically the PKK.
Right. And all of this coming straight from the Istanbul Chief Public Prosecutor's Office. So, you know, it's not just some random accusation.
Yeah, it's coming from a pretty high level. And, I mean, it definitely sent shockwaves,
Yeah,
especially with the political climate being so polarized in Turkey.
definitely. And, I mean, you can imagine what happened next. It was like a powder keg.
Yeah, protests broke out pretty much immediately, right?
Oh, yeah. People were in the streets of Istanbul and other cities, too. They were furious and also really worried about what this whole thing could mean.
Exactly, because it raises so many questions.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that this arrest, it didn't just come out of nowhere.
Right. It seems like there's a bigger story here.
Totally. Our sources show that the government had actually been stepping up their actions against a bunch of opposition figures since November of last year.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then the timing of this arrest with Ibrahimoğlu, it's just too suspicious to ignore.
Yeah, I mean, the day before he's arrested at his own university, Istanbul University, they announced that they're taking away his degree.
Right.
They said there were some irregularities, but come on.
Yeah.
Not a coincidence.
I know, right? It feels very calculated.
Yeah. And for people who don't know, to be president in Turkey, you have to have a university degree.
It's a requirement.
So this decision by the university, it basically blocks İmamoğlu from running for president, ever.
Exactly.
And this happened literally the day before he was arrested.
Wow.
And to make things even more interesting, his party, the CHP, they were expected to officially nominate him for president really soon.
It's like they knew.
Yeah, you can't help but wonder what the real motivation was behind all of this.
Right. Was this just standard legal procedure playing out, or was it a way to get rid of a strong political rival? I mean, you have to think about that.
Totally. And I mean, I think the opposition parties were pretty clear about what they thought.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's actually get into the nitty-gritty of the arrest itself.
Okay.
What actually went down in those first few hours?
Yeah.
Well, the reports we've seen paint a pretty dramatic picture.
Oh, yeah.
So early that morning, İmamoğlu is at his home in Istanbul.
Right.
And suddenly the police are surrounding his house.
They show up.
Yeah. And here's where things get really interesting, because İmamoğlu does something very 21st century.
Yeah.
He starts communicating directly with the public through social media.
He goes live.
Well, he posts this video on Twitter, and it seems like he's literally getting ready for the day when he's recording this.
Wow.
And in video, he's like, okay, we're facing some serious pressure, but I'm not backing down, and I trust the people of Turkey.
That's powerful.
It's a really powerful moment, a sitting mayor using social media to essentially broadcast his own arrest.
Right. As it's happening.
Exactly. And shortly after that tweet, he's taken into custody along with all those other people that were arrested.
Right. Over 100 people.
Yeah. And it's important to remember just how serious those charges are that the Istanbul Chief Public Prosecutor's Office brought against him.
Definitely.
I mean, beyond the whole corruption and bribery thing, they're accusing him of leading a criminal organization.
Which is huge.
It is. And then there's that charge of aiding the PKK, which is a big deal in Turkey and internationally.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, the PKK is designated as a terrorist organization by Turkey and a lot of other countries.
Yeah, it's a very sensitive topic in Turkey.
Absolutely.
I mean, the conflict with the PKK has gone on for so long, and there's been so much tragedy there.
Right.
So any suggestion that someone is working with them is a very serious accusation.
It has a lot of weight.
Yeah, politically and socially.
Right.
And obviously, Imamoglu and his supporters are completely denying all of these charges.
Totally.
They're saying this is purely political. They're saying that it's a way to get rid of him because he's a threat to President Erdogan and the AK party.
Which makes sense when you think about those big wins he had in Istanbul.
Right. He's shown that he can beat the AK party.
Yeah, he's a problem for them.
And it's interesting because as part of the investigation, they actually seized his construction company.
Wow, really?
And they also detained the company's general manager.
So they're really going after him.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
The government's reaction right after the arrest was pretty telling, too.
Oh, yeah. How so?
First of all, they slapped a 4-day ban on all public demonstrations in Istanbul.
Wow, a total ban.
Yeah. No protests allowed.
Yeah.
They also closed off major roads in the city and restricted access to some really important social media platforms.
Like which ones?
Twitter, YouTube, Instagram.
So basically the main ones people use.
Yeah, the ones where people share information and organize.
Right, so that raises some red flags about freedom of assembly and freedom of speech.
Absolutely. And it doesn't stop there. They were trying to control the narrative from every angle.
Really?
Yeah, so the Radio and Television Supreme Council, RTTUK, which is like the government's media watchdog,
Right.
they reportedly put a lot of pressure on different media outlets.
Wow.
And they even went as far as to ban broadcasts on several TV channels that are known for being critical of the government.
So they're censoring the media.
It seems like they really wanted to control what people were hearing about these arrests.
Wow, it's interesting how one big political event can have a ripple effect on everything else, like the economy.
Oh, yeah.
We saw a huge impact on the Turkish economy almost as soon as Imamoglu was arrested.
Yeah, it was a pretty wild ride.
So tell me what happened.
Well, the Turkish lira took a nosedive.
How bad are we talking?
It lost a whopping 14.5% of its value against the US dollar in a really short amount of time.
Wow, that's a huge drop.
Yeah. And the BS 100 index, which is basically the Turkish stock market, that also plummeted. It fell by more than 8%.
Ouch.
Yeah. And to make matters worse, even Turkey's long-term government bonds, which are in US dollars, those lost value too.
So it wasn't just the immediate stuff, it was impacting their long-term economic outlook too.
Exactly. And for those who maybe don't follow economics closely, a sudden drop in currency like that can have a lot of knock-on effects.
Right.
It makes all those imported goods way more expensive.
Which can lead to inflation.
Exactly. And then it just creates a ton of uncertainty for businesses and for everyday people who are trying to make ends meet.
Right, because now things are suddenly costing more.
Exactly. And the Turkish central bank, they knew they had to do something, so they intervened in the currency markets.
They stepped in.
Yeah, they sold almost $10 billion of their foreign currency reserves.
Wow. That's a lot of money.
It is. It's a huge intervention. And it shows how concerned they were about the economic fallout.
It's like they were trying to stop the bleeding.
Exactly. And it shows just how vulnerable the Turkish economy is to political instability.
For sure.
And then you have these international financial institutions reacting too.
Oh, yeah. Like who?
Well, JP Morgan, for example, they revised their forecasts for inflation and interest rates in Turkey.
They adjusted their predictions.
Yeah, and they raised them. Basically, they're saying that they expect more economic uncertainty and potential instability because of all this political drama.
So basically they're saying things could get worse.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But in the midst of all this chaos, Turkey's Minister of Treasury and Finance, Mehmet Şimşek, he makes this public statement.
Damage control.
Yeah, basically he's like, don't worry, everyone. The government is taking the necessary steps, and our economic program is still on track.
Trying to calm everyone down.
Yeah, it's what you typically hear from leaders during times of crisis.
Right.
But you know how it is, sometimes those assurances, they don't really hold much weight.
Yeah, especially when there's so much political uncertainty in the background.
Right, and I think the market reactions, they really spoke for themselves. Investors were spooked.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So now let's talk about the domestic political scene. As you might imagine, the reaction from the opposition was swift and strong.
Yeah, a pretty united front.
Totally.
Yeah.
So Imamoglu's own party, the CHP, they came out swinging.
Led by their chairman, Özgür Özel.
Right. They called the arrest a political coup. They didn't mince words.
Wow.
Yeah. And they also reiterated their support for Imamoglu. They even called him their next president.
So they're really standing by him.
Absolutely. They see this as a direct attack on their party and their future.
Definitely.
And then you have the good party, led by Musavat Dervishoglu. They also condemned the arrest.
And what did they say?
Well, they echoed the CHP's sentiment that this was all politically motivated.
Okay.
But then they took it a step further and suggested that they might boycott the next election as a form of protest.
Wow. That's a big statement.
It is. It shows just how strongly they oppose this whole situation.
And what about the pro-Kurdish Dem Party? What was their reaction?
So the Dem Party, with representatives like Tansur Bakarhan and Ebru Güney, they also weighed in. They framed the arrest as an attempt to silence the opposition and said that Turkey really needs true democracy.
Yeah.
And they made a really interesting point. They compared the repression that Kurdish political movements have faced in the past to what they see happening to the wider opposition now.
So they're drawing a parallel there.
Yeah, and it's a disturbing parallel because it suggests a pattern of how the government deals with dissent.
Right.
And it's not just coming from the usual suspects.
What do you mean?
Or even figures from parties that aren't traditionally aligned with the main opposition. They're expressing concern too.
Oh, wow. Like who?
Well, for example, Ahmet Davutoglu, the former prime minister,
Right.
he leads the Future Party now, and he came out and criticized the whole thing about the university degree being annulled.
Yeah, it does seem like a convenient way to disqualify him.
Right. Davutoglu called it a disgrace and scandal.
Mm.
And, he's not someone who usually sides with the main opposition.
So it's interesting that he's speaking out, too.
Yeah, it shows that this issue is resonating beyond the usual political divides.
For sure.
And then you have Fatih Erbakan, the leader of the New Welfare Party.
Okay.
He also expressed worries about the justice system being manipulated
Yeah.
and the negative effects on the economy.
Right. So people are worried about the rule of law being undermined and about the economic fallout.
Exactly. It's not just a political issue at this point. It's affecting everything.
And were there any protests?
Oh, yeah. Beyond the official statements from the parties, there are a lot of grassroots reactions, too.
Like what kind?
Well, for example, the employees of the Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality, where Ekrem İmamoğlu is the mayor,
Right.
they organized workplace protests to show their support for him.
So they walked off the job.
Yeah, and then you had spontaneous protests by regular citizens in Istanbul, in Ankara, and on university campuses all over the country.
Wow. So it's not just organized political groups, it's everyday people, too.
Exactly, and that really speaks volumes about how deeply this has resonated with the public.
It's like they're saying enough is enough.
Totally. And the international community also had a lot to say about all of this. Yeah, there was a lot of condemnation from different countries and international organizations.
What were some of the reactions?
Well, for example, the Council of Europe, which is a big human rights organization in Europe.
Right.
They condemned İmamoğlu's arrest. They called it an action against the will of the Turkish people.
Wow.
Yeah. And they even said they were going to have an emergency meeting to discuss the situation.
Oh, it's on their radar.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And then you have individual governments speaking out too.
Like who?
Well, the German Foreign Ministry, they said that the arrest was damaging to democracy in Turkey.
Okay.
And they announced that they were going to talk to Turkish officials about it.
So they're putting diplomatic pressure on them.
Yeah. And the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they expressed deep concern and warned that this could have serious consequences for Turkish democracy.
So they're not happy about it.
Not at all. And
Yeah.
then you have Nacho Sanchez Amor.
Mhm.
He's the European Parliament's rapporteur on Turkey. So he's specifically focused on Turkey. He said that the whole process was concerning and that the European Parliament was going to be watching things closely.
So they're keeping a close eye on it.
Yeah. And Human Rights Watch, they also issued a condemnation. They basically said that the detentions were politically motivated and aimed at stopping the opposition from doing their work.
So they're saying it's an attempt to stifle dissent.
Exactly. And then you have these personal gestures of solidarity, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like the mayor of Athens, Haris Doukas, he sent a message of support to İmamoğlu.
That's cool.
Yeah, it shows that people around the world are paying attention and they're concerned.
Yeah, it's not just an internal Turkish issue.
Exactly. And I think to really understand the gravity of the situation, we need to remember that this wasn't İmamoğlu's first brush with the law.
Right. He was already on trial for something.
Yeah, he's been in court since 2022 for insulting electoral officials.
And how did that case go?
Well, he was actually given a prison sentence and a ban from politics.
Wow.
Yeah, but that ruling was under appeal, so he was still free and able to serve as mayor.
So this new arrest, it just adds another layer to the whole thing.
Yeah, and it really gives more weight to the argument that this is all about getting rid of a powerful opponent.
Right.
I mean, İmamoğlu, he's proven that he can win elections.
Yeah.
He beat the AK party in Istanbul not once, but twice.
Exactly. And in a city as important as Istanbul, that's a big deal.
It shows that he has the potential to challenge Erdoğan.
Right.
And the timing of this arrest is just too perfect, you know?
Right. Right before he was going to be nominated for president.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The CHP was widely expected to announce him as their candidate. And remember, there's been talk of the next presidential election happening earlier than 2028.
So it's like they wanted to take him out of the running before he could even get started?
It definitely looks that way.
And what does Erdogan say about all of this?
Well, he's basically dismissed it.
Yeah.
He said that the problems within the CHP are their own business.
Okay.
And he's accused the opposition of trying to distract from the legal accusations by playing politics.
So he's saying this is just the law running its course.
Exactly. That's the government's line.
Okay.
But then you have these huge protests happening despite the ban on demonstrations.
Right. And the CHP said over 300,000 people were out there.
Yeah, that's a lot of people. And according to an Al Jazeera report, they were protesting what they see as systemic injustice in Turkey.
Wow. So it's about more than just a Mosulu's arrest.
Yeah, it seems like there's a deeper sense of frustration and a feeling that things aren't right.
Right.
And then you have this article in The Economist that compares the situation to what they call an old Soviet formula.
What's that?
Basically finding or even making up a crime to target someone you want to get rid of.
Wow. That's a pretty serious comparison.
It is.
Yeah.
And they also made a really interesting point about the global context.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
They suggested that the presidency of Donald Trump might have emboldened authoritarian leaders around the world to act more aggressively against their opponents.
So they're saying that Trump's actions might have given other leaders permission to do the same.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thought. And then finally, we need to think about the potential impact on the political alliances in Turkey.
Right. The CHP and the Dem Party.
Yeah, those allegations about İmamoğlu supporting the PKK through his alliance with the Dem Party, they could really strain that relationship.
Yeah, because the Dem Party, they've always been in a tricky position.
Right, they've been targeted by the government in the past.
Yeah.
And they're also trying to navigate this whole issue of the peace process with the Kurdish minority.
Right. So it's a very sensitive situation for them.
Absolutely. And how they respond to this whole thing,
Yeah,
it could have big implications for the future of the opposition.
totally.
So we've got a lot to unpack here. A prominent opposition figure arrested on some really serious charges, immediate and strong reactions from people in Turkey and around the world, and a whole lot of economic uncertainty as a result.
Yeah, it's like a bomb went off in Turkish politics.
Yeah, and what we've learned through this deep dive is that this is way bigger than just one arrest.
It really seems like a turning point.
Yeah. And it could have lasting consequences for the direction of the country, especially with elections on the horizon.
Definitely.
And that leads us to a really important question for all of you listening. What does all of this tell us about the state of democracy and the rule of law in Turkey right now?
Yeah, and what does it mean for the future of the country?
Right. And how will this affect Turkey's place on the world stage?
Oh, any questions?
It's a complex situation with a lot at stake, and we'll definitely be keeping a close eye on how things develop.
For sure.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Always a pleasure.